The champagne flute was the coldest thing in the room, a shard of ice in her hand against the blistering heat of 1,000 feigned smiles. Alara Vance sat in the precise center of a vortex of joy, a silent, still point in a whirling universe of silken laughter. From her vantage point at a secluded table, she had a perfect, panoramic view of the wedding reception. The bride, her former assistant and dearest friend, Sophia, was radiant, spinning in her husband's arms, a blur of white tulle and unfettered happiness. Alara had paid for the dress, the flowers, the entire breathtaking affair at the vineyard. It was the least she could do. After the accident, when Vance Innovations board had whispered about her instability, it was Sophia who had stood like a lioness, guarding the door to her hospital room and later, her office. And now, Sophia had a new protector. A new center. Alara's fingers tightened on the wheel of her chair, a polished titanium extension of her will. At 35, she commanded a tech empire from a throne of her own design, but here, amidst the fragrant jasmine and string quartet, she was reduced to a monument of pity. She saw the glances, swift, sidelong things full of a sorrow that felt like vinegar on a wound. Poor Alara. So strong, so broken. All that money, and she can't even dance. She took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like ash. "Mommy, why is that lady sitting down?" The voice, clear and unself-conscious, cut through the ambient noise. Alara turned. A little girl, no more than 5, with a riot of chestnut curls and a dress smudged with frosting, stood a few feet away, pointing. A man materialized behind her, his hand gently coming down on her shoulder. "Lily, we don't point. It's not polite." His voice was a low, warm baritone, the kind that didn't need to rise to be heard. He was tall, dressed in a slightly ill-fitting suit that spoke of infrequent use, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and hair that looked like it had been recently tamed by a wet comb. "But everyone else is standing up," Lily persisted, her wide, curious eyes fixed on Alara. The man's gaze met Alara's. She braced for it, the flicker of pity, the awkward shift, the hurried apology. But it didn't come. His eyes held hers, and in their hazel depths, she saw only a quiet, direct acknowledgement. No pity, no fear. "Some people's legs don't work like yours and mine, sweetheart," he said to his daughter, his voice calm and matter of fact. "That's why she uses a wheelchair. It helps her get around." The simplicity of the explanation, devoid of any morbid fascination or hushed tones, was like a balm. Alara found her voice, a tool she used to command boardrooms, now strangely soft. "It's my very own chariot. Goes much faster than walking, actually." Lily's eyes widened in awe. "Really, really," Alara confirmed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. The man extended his hand. "I'm Ben. And this is my daughter, Lily. We're crashing my cousin's wedding." "Well, I'm invited. She's the +1. Alara," she said, taking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and he didn't release it too quickly or hold it too long. It was just right. "I know," Ben said, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Alara Vance. Vance Innovations. You're kind of a big deal. My daughter here is currently more impressed with the chariot, though." Alara laughed, a real, surprised sound that felt foreign in her throat. A wise prioritization. They talked. Ben was a history teacher and a freelance illustrator, a widower for 3 years. He spoke of his wife, Claire, not with a grief that suffocated, but with a love that had settled into a permanent, gentle ache. He showed her a small, worn sketchbook he carried, filled with whimsical drawings of Lily, of dragons, of everyday moments rendered magical by his lines. "She used to say I saw the world in softer pencil," he said, his thumb stroking the cover. Alara, in turn, found herself speaking not of stock prices and product launches, but of the silence of her penthouse, the way her world had shrunk after the accident from a sprawling landscape to a series of meticulously designed, accessible rooms. Lily, growing bored, began to dance by their table, a joyous, uncoordinated flailing of limbs. The band struck up a slow, melodic tune. All around them, couples moved to the dance floor, including Sophia and her new husband. They swayed, lost in each other, a perfect picture. Alara's smile faded. The familiar, cold loneliness began to seep back in, a tangible weight on her shoulders. She was an observer again, a curator of other people's happiness. Ben watched her, his gaze missing nothing. He saw the slight droop of her shoulders, the way her eyes followed the dancing couple with a longing so profound it was a physical presence. He knelt down, bringing himself to her eye level. Lily, noticing her father's movement, stopped her dancing and watched, curious. "Alara," Ben said, his voice low and earnest, cutting through the music and the chatter. "I know I'm not much. A public school teacher with crayons in his pocket and a 5-year-old who believes in fairies. And I know you're, you. But watching you sit here, alone in this crowd, feels like the biggest tragedy in this whole beautiful place." Her breath hitched. No one spoke to her like this. No one dared. He glanced at the dance floor, then back at her, his eyes holding a universe of quiet courage. "So, I have a question, and you can absolutely tell me it's the most ridiculous thing you've heard all day." He paused, took a deep breath, and asked, "Will you be my date?" Alara stared at him, utterly stunned. "Your date? For what?" "For this dance," he said, his gaze never wavering. "Right here." Tears, hot and sudden, pricked the back of her eyes. She blinked them away furiously. "Ben, I can't dance." "Says who?" he asked, a gentle challenge in his tone. He stood up and turned to his daughter. "Lily, what's the most important rule of dancing?" Lily beamed, placing her small, sticky hands on the arms of Alara's wheelchair. "That you move your heart." Ben's smile was soft. "Exactly." He looked at Alara, his hand outstretched, not to pull her up, but to invite her in. "So, Alara Vance, will you move your heart with me?" The world narrowed to this man, this little girl, and this impossible, beautiful question. The CEO, the titan of industry, felt something long frozen inside her begin to crack. She placed her hand in his. "Yes," she whispered. Ben didn't try to move her chair. Instead, he simply held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in time with the music. Lily, with the solemnity of a high priestess, began to slowly push the wheelchair, rocking it back and forth in a gentle, swaying motion. It wasn't a dance as the world defined it. It was better. It was a connection. Ben hummed the melody softly, his eyes locked with hers, and in that moment, Alara wasn't a woman in a wheelchair. She was a woman, dancing. It was the most heartbreakingly beautiful moment of her life. And as she looked into Ben's kind eyes, she felt a terrifying, wonderful, fragile hope begin to bloom. The music swelled, a tender wave of violins and piano that seemed to exist solely for the three of them. Alara closed her eyes, letting the rhythm, the gentle rocking of her chair, and the warm, steady pressure of Ben's hand anchor her. For the first time in 2 years, since the screech of tires and the shattering of glass had stolen the use of her legs and the man who was supposed to be in them, she felt whole. The jagged edges of her loneliness were being smoothed away by the simple, profound act of this shared moment. "See," Ben murmured, his voice a soft vibration in the air between them. "You're a natural." Lily, her small face a mask of concentration, pushed the chair with all her might, her tiny effort making the dance feel earned, precious. "We're dancing, Daddy," she chirped. "We are, sweetheart," Ben said, his gaze still on Alara. "We really are." When the song ended, the spell was broken, but its warmth lingered. They spent the rest of the evening together. Ben fetched her plates of food, navigating the buffet with a father's practiced efficiency. Lily drew a picture on a napkin, a stick figure in a wheelchair being pushed by a larger and a smaller stick figure, all under a giant smiling sun. Alara tucked it into the small pouch on the side of her chair, a treasure more valuable than any contract. They talked of inconsequential things, favorite books, terrible movies, Lily's impending first day of kindergarten. Alara learned that Ben's wife, Claire, had been a gardener, and that he still tended her rose bushes, though he killed every other plant he touched. He learned that Alara's favorite food was cheap, greasy pizza, a secret she guarded from her nutritionist. It was easy. It was terrifying. As the reception wound down and guests began to depart in bursts of laughter and farewells, Sophia found her way over, her eyes shining with tears. She hugged Alara tightly. "I saw," she whispered in her ear. "I'm so happy for you." The look she gave Ben was one of pure, unadulterated gratitude. Finally, it was just the three of them in the emptying, twinkle-lit garden. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. "Can Alara come home with us?" Lily asked, her head drooping sleepily against Ben's shoulder. Ben chuckled, a soft, nervous sound. "Not tonight, Bug. But maybe we could see her again. If she'd like that." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He walked her to her adapted van, where her driver, Marcus, waited discreetly. Ben helped her navigate the slight gravel incline, his hand a firm, respectful support on her back. At the door, they paused, the night stretching around them, full of unspoken promises. "I had the best time," Alara said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "So did I," Ben replied. He looked like he wanted to say more, his eyes dropping to her lips for a fleeting second. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his worn sketchbook. He tore a page from the back, scribbled a number, and handed it to her. "No assistants, no gatekeepers. That's my cell. Call me, please." She took the paper, the connection feeling more intimate than a kiss. "I will." He helped her into the van, his hand lingering on hers for a final, electric moment. As Marcus pulled away, Alara watched through the window as Ben stood there, a solitary figure holding his sleeping daughter, until the night swallowed them whole. The week that followed was a blur of color in her monochrome world. They texted. They talked for hours on the phone, conversations that stretched into the early morning. He made her laugh. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke of the pressures of her work, the ghosts of her past. He didn't offer solutions, he offered solidarity. On Friday, he asked her to dinner. At his place. A simple, home-cooked meal. Her nerves were a live wire as Marcus drove her to the address, a modest but well-kept bungalow with a sprawling, slightly overgrown garden. Ben answered the door, wiping his hands on an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," with Lily peeking out from behind his legs. The house was warm, lived in, and smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Books were stacked on every surface, and Lily's artwork covered the walls. It was the antithesis of her sterile, minimalist penthouse. It was a home. After putting Lily to bed, they sat on the sofa with glasses of wine. The air between them was thick with a sweet, aching tension. "Alara," Ben began, his voice quiet. "I know this is fast. I know our worlds are different. But these last few days, I haven't felt this alive since." "I know," she whispered, placing her hand over his. "Me neither." He turned his hand to lace his fingers through hers. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. His kiss was gentle, a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of hope, of red wine, of a future she had stopped believing in. When they parted, they were both breathless. Ben rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Please, just stay." In that moment, she would have given him anything. Her company, her fortune, her heart. It was already his. "Okay," she breathed. He smiled, a brilliant, joyful thing, and kissed her again. "Let me just go check on Lily. Make sure she's still tucked in." He disappeared down the hall, and Alara leaned back against the cushions, her heart soaring. She looked around the cozy, cluttered living room, at the evidence of a life filled with love and little messes, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she wanted this. She wanted him. She wanted the crayons and the bedtime stories and the man who saw her soul, not her chair. Her gaze drifted to a large, framed photograph on the bookshelf. It was a wedding photo. A younger Ben, beaming, in a sharp black tux, his arm wrapped around his bride. The bride was beautiful, with a cascade of dark hair and a smile that could light a city. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She stood, her legs weak with a phantom tremor, and walked to the bookshelf. She picked up the frame, her fingers trembling. The woman's face. That smile. She knew it. Not from a memory, but from a file. A cold, clinical file on her computer, marked, pending litigation. The woman was Claire Davis. The gardener. And 3 years ago, the self-driving algorithm in Alara's flagship sedan, the Vance V10, had malfunctioned on a rain-slicked road. It had misinterpreted a puddle's reflection as a solid object, swerved violently, and crossed the center line. Alara had been in the passenger seat, walking away with a spinal injury. The other driver, in the cheap, non-autonomous sedan, had not been so lucky. Alara stared at the photograph, at Claire Davis's vibrant, living eyes, and the world tilted on its axis. The man she was falling in love with, the child who had unlocked her heart, she was the reason they were broken. Her company's code, her life's work, was the weapon that had shattered theirs. Ben's footsteps sounded in the hall. "She's out like a light," he said, his voice warm with love. Alara turned, the framed photograph clutched in her white-knuckled hands. The tears that streamed down her face now were not of joy, but of a horror so complete it felt like dying. Ben's smile vanished. "Alara, what's wrong?" She tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken whisper, the words a condemnation. Her name was Claire Davis. The confusion on his face morphed into dawning comprehension, then into a slow, tectonic shift of agony. The color drained from his face. The love in his eyes curdled into a disbelief so profound it was physically painful to witness. The beautiful, heartbreaking dance was over. And in its place, stood the unbearable, unforgettable truth.